Hello, YouTube and Twitch. And I'm also on TikTok and on Discord if you want to join in any of those other places as well. Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And it has been a very, very interesting couple of weeks because, the world is on fire and I'm very glad. Yeah, it's football and Wimbledon and all of the things. And we are on chapter 6 of The Architecture of Modern Empire, conversations with Arundhati Roy and David Barsamian. And for those of you who have been following along, it's we're starting on page 122. What have your thoughts so far about the book? Because I've been making notes and underlining things that I haven't noticed. Like, I go back and skim read the chapter and make notes. What have you noticed that has really stood out for you? Because I feel like this is something that's not really talked about in the mainstream, is what is going on in terms of empire in a country that posits itself as one of the imperial core, which is, let's face it, Indian people are deputy whites. And so, a country that basically wants to be a colonial power and cannot be because it's India, It is a country that has been pillaged so many times by, especially the British. The British cannot pay back India in this lifetime. There's no way that England is ever paying India back for what it stole, and how it destroyed the Indian economy. So what do you think? And welcome everybody. Hambles, I haven't seen you in a long, long time. And so we start chapter 6. The checkbook and the cruise missile. Or missile. How do you guys say it? Missile or missile? Thank you. Oh my goodness, it's so cute. And we know, okay, I wrote a piece not too long ago talking about how the missile is a metaphor for this international dick measuring contest. So, let's talk about it. Who writes the checks and who fires the missiles and who gets fired against? So he asks, in this interview that was conducted at Berkeley High School in California on the 18th of August 2004, he asks, you've participated in and reported in one of the most extraordinary, largely women-driven movements, the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the movement to save the Narmada Valley. Based on your experience and what you saw in the valley, what are the ingredients for a successful social movement? I'd like to know, what do you think are the ingredients for a successful social movement? Because I think people in the global north don't look to the global south enough for these movements, because our lives and our struggles and all of that are devalued by the West. So she says, first of all, if you don't mind, I just want to clarify one thing, which is that often the world is in search of icons. And they like to confuse me as some kind of leader of that mass movement, and I'm not. So I just want to clarify that. I'm a writer, But I think the movement in the Narmada Valley is an interesting phenomenon. In India, the Supreme Court gave a retrogressive judgment 2 years ago that completely justified the building of big dams all over and has opened the door to international finance coming back. So a lot of people look at that movement as not a successful one, but the opposite. And that isn't true. First of all, there are many, many dams being built on that river, and some of them have been stopped by the Narmada Bacha Andolan. But the most contentious dam was called the Sardar Sarovar, and that dam is being constructed at speed now, as are others. And the violation of human rights in that scenario is something that the media not something the media highlights anymore, because it's bored. And it's not that people aren't getting slaughtered or people aren't getting killed. It's just that they're just getting relentlessly dispossessed and impoverished. And when you look at the impoverishment of people in these cases, it all starts with displacement. It starts with people stealing their land. And no matter what that land is used for, when people's homes are destroyed, when people's place in the world is taken from them, or they are forcibly moved from their place in the world, their physical space that they take up in the world, impoverishment starts there. Displacement always leads to a lack in something. And I think that's really important to note, that where has there been the greatest poverty in the world? Where land has been stolen, where people have been stolen from their land. But I think a huge lesson in that movement that I've learned certainly is that the definitions of what we mean by success and what we mean by failure have to be changed. If you look at areas in India where there hasn't been a history of resistance, you can see how the police or army can just go in, terrorize people, pick up women, rape them, torture them. They can do what they like. They cannot go into the Narmada Valley and do that to anyone. So I think we have to understand that the real victory is how you set yourself against power and how you insist on your rights, even if you seem to be on the losing side to the outside world. Incredibly important. If you are shown to resist, they will be afraid. There are huge battles remaining to be fought. India is a feudal country. Women in India are deeply involved in resistance for two reasons. One, because the whole process of corporate globalization makes poorer women the first victims, so they stand to lose so much more. For example, when people are being displaced or dispossessed by a dam, they lose their land and some of them are compensated with money. That money goes to men. The men may buy a motorcycle or drink it away in despair. It leaves the woman vulnerable. So the women are at the core of the resistance. And I also think one of the reasons is because India has a huge tradition of nonviolent resistance, which it does embrace women and allows them to be at the heart of it. Even though I must say that we should remember that Indian independence was not entirely nonviolent. It's a myth that it was entirely nonviolent. And this is something that the current government wants to make up stories about, like, oh, it was done entirely through nonviolence, we're Hindu and yada, 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 and paint this picture that it was only the Muslim people who were violent, it was only the Sikhs who were violent. It's absolute nonsense. Thank you, my love. So he asks, what are the main obstacles in building a movement? She says, in my view, there are roughly two kinds of resistant movements happening in the world today. One is movements like the Landless People's Movement in Brazil, or the Narmada Movement, or the Zapatistas, or the Anti-Privatization Forum. People who are fighting their own states for radical change. And then movements like liberation struggles in Palestine, Kashmir, the northeast of India, in Tibet. These are struggles for self-determination along lines that were arbitrarily drawn by imperialist powers in the past century. And those struggles face much harsher repression. So in a way, they've also been pushed into retrogressive positions, sometimes speaking the same language as the states they hope to overthrow. Oof. sometimes speaking the same language as the states they hope to overthrow. Eek. That's interesting. We can get into that another time, though. And then you have Iraq, which I think is another phase, recolonization. Because the capitalist machine now, in order to control natural resources, cannot do it that easily by the remote control of corporate globalization. So it goes in with military aggression and takes over the natural resources in geopolitically strategic places. I mean, that's exactly what Israel is, a geopolitical convenience for the West. We are all waiting for Iraq to stage a pristine, feminist, democratic, secular resistance while they're being brutalized by the most powerful country in the world, with the most powerful weapons in the world. And if we're going to wait for a pristine resistance movement to invest our purity in, we're never going to find it. Yes. Leftists, I'm talking to y'all. All you leftists who say that everybody must be perfect in order for their resistance or their politics to matter. Fuck you. We fight for people because they're people, not because they have the same ideas as us. I want a decent living wage for everyone, not just people who think like me. I want less than a 40-hour work week for everyone. I want universal basic income for everyone. Oh, absolutely. And granted, that being said, I don't expect the most marginalized to put differences aside and work with their oppressors. Absolutely not. Healthcare for everybody, education for everybody. And I do mean everybody. I do not expect the most marginalized people to work with their oppressors side by side. Black women, you do not have to work alongside white women. Or white people, for that matter. Hell, you don't even need to work alongside me. I am inherently anti-black. So there can be no true solidarity given all of these divisions that have been created by colonialism, neocolonialism, and empire in general, by capitalism, by the white supremacist delusion, by just patriarchy. I do not expect people to work alongside their abusers. However, as leftists, we need to consolidate our movements and stop waiting for purity to happen within each movement. We cannot wait for that. Absolutely. Before we begin to preach to the Iraqi resistance about how exactly they should conduct their war, we should show up our end of the resistance by insisting that the US and its allies withdraw from Iraq and pay reparations. I want to say that there's a simple list of demands, which are not just demands but questions of principle. That they withdraw from Iraq, they pay reparations, not just reparations for the war, but the sanctions. That they annul these contracts that allow Iraq's resources to be taken over by American companies, and basically get out. It sounds simple, doesn't it? Talk more about Iraq and the intersection of imperialism and racism. Oh. Much has been made of the fact that corporate globalization is a new and different way of doing things. I don't think it's new and that different. It's old imperialism. I think basically old imperialism went back into the workshop and got its jagged ends sandpapered down and came back a sort of new, improved, weatherproofed. I can't say it any better. In May in India, there was an election. The BJP, the right-wing Hindu formation, was ousted and replaced by the Congress Party. Please talk about that and the upcoming elections here in the US. You've had an opportunity to hear Senator Kerry and the current occupant in the Oval Office. This was in 2004, mind you. She says it's somewhat dangerous to equate the Indian elections with the American elections. But let me say that we lived through 5 years of hell in India. We lived through a regime which was as close to fascist as you can get, and now they're getting worse. We lived through times when a government-assisted pogrom took place in the state of Gujarat, where 2,000 Muslims were killed, gang-raped, burned alive, and 150,000 were driven from their homes, in a time where all of us lived in fear of what would happen to any of us who were speaking out, and a realization that the economic despair that was settling in was such a wonderful breeding ground for this kind of fascism. When the elections came, none of us, and when I say us, I'm talking about people involved in the politics of opposition, not party political opposition, but genuine opposition, could bear the idea of actually openly campaigning for Congress, because they really sowed the seeds for the right wing to walk through, whether it was nuclear tests or communalism or neoliberalism. The Congress was there planting the seeds for the BJP to reap the harvest. And it's what we say about the Democrats, isn't it? They paved the way. They really did pave the way for MAGA. Hi, B. Welcome. Because they were reactionary. They did not take a stand. They were lackadaisical in their responses to crises. The Democrats did pave the way for the right wing. And we need to understand that as a fundamental truth of the US. That when you're not in opposition of the fascists, you're laying the groundwork for them. No election pundit, no national press, no exit polls really predicted that Congress would win, because the urban elite and the national press in India are now so disconnected with what is happening in rural areas that they just didn't have a handle on the levels of despair that existed outside the glittering parts of the metropolitan cities. And so the Congress came into power as the biggest party. The left won historically its largest share of the vote ever. I wouldn't call the Congress Party left. Just like I wouldn't call the Democrats left. And it was clearly a vote against fascism and neoliberal reform. I was watching the media coverage of this election, and it was amazing that while the corporate press showed the spectacle of Indian democracy on the move, poor farmers and the journeys of elephant back, the veiled women and their beautiful jewelry, everybody with thick glasses and sticks hobbling to the election booths. As soon as the vote showed that the BJP had lost, there was panic because they thought that maybe Congress would actually implement its election promises. So what happened in India is basically what happened with Harris. Veering slightly to the right, ever so slightly, more and more to the right, to appease the voters who would have voted for the BJP. Harris appeasing voters who would have voted for Trump. The stadium where Switzerland is playing the Macarena. How many of you remember the Macarena? I do. I have embarrassing stories about that. Anyway. If Harris had to implement some of her election promises, I would be terrified. So the poor, the millions who had come out to vote, were dismissed like badly paid extras on a film set. And suddenly, all the television sets had split screens, half of it outside Sonia Gandhi's office while she was cobbling together the coalition, and the other half located 24 hours a day outside the Bombay Stock Exchange. The Sensex plummeted. The next day, the media, whose own publicly listed stocks were plummeting, reported the news as if Pakistan had launched intercontinental ballistic missiles on Delhi. And even before the government was formed, the Congress railroaded into, I can't say railroaded because I'm sure they did it quite willingly, they promised they would not really radically change the privatization reforms. They assured big business houses. So once elections were over, the poor were just expected to bugger off home, and policy would be decided despite them. Yep. Here you have a different scenario, I think, where the opposition doesn't even do you the service of pretending to be opposition. I mean, so I was talking at the American Sociological Association the other day, and I said in watching this American election, it's quite frightening to see how it's been reduced to personality contests between two men. The biggest difference seems to be that Kerry says he likes Charlize Theron, and I don't know which actress Bush likes. You have to understand that demonizing Bush has a downside, which is demonizing him at the expense of not understanding the way this machine works. Oof. Do you remember that time? And what do you remember of that time? As somebody who lives in one of the subject nations, as somebody who is not living in the US, what is John Kerry actually saying? If the anti-war movement is going to openly campaign for him, then is it in his support of soft imperialist policies? Kerry says that he wants 40,000 more troops, and he agrees with Bush 100% on Israel, and that he'll keep 98% of tax cuts. And the policies in Iraq are going to be that the UN is going to be the cover for the American occupation, and that the Indian and Pakistani soldiers are going there to do the killing and dying, and maybe the French and Germans and the Russians will share in the spoils in Iraq's resources. Kerry wasn't saying much different. And that is why I always say, whoever wins US elections, the global south is fucked. The more power the US gains internationally, the more fucked we are. And that is why it matters how you vote internally. Not on internal policy, not on external policy. The only people who are exempt from criticism for not voting for Harris in the last election are Palestinian Americans. Because how do you tell them to vote for just a little less genocide? Everybody who didn't vote for Harris, this is also on you. Any questions? I've been reading for half an hour. any questions or any, you know, anything. My head is very congested right now. I have the flu. I've just been getting sick so often this year. It's unbelievable. Okay, Twitch and YouTube, I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I shall be right back. And YouTube and Twitch, I am back. I love you too. Oh, okay. So that's the best thing that's happened over the past few weeks. So, back to the US in 2004. Kerry wasn't saying much different to Bush. So it's not, for the Global South, it is definitely not Republican and Democrat. It is one imperialist over the other. And which one will do less harm? Is it better for us to have a stupid emperor or a smarter emperor? I don't know. But the question is, are we looking to challenge the system itself or not? We love you, Kiara, so, so much. In India, as soon as Congress came into power, people who have been quite radical under the BJP demanding an end to censorship and making powerful statements against fascism are suddenly saying, no, censorship is not such a bad thing because the Hindu fundamentalists should not be allowed to say things they're saying. In a way, it co-opts resistance. And this is something that we're talking about with abolition feminism now, is that the language of resistance is always co-opted to undermine resistance, to undermine true opposition. So we have to understand that at this point in the world, this democracy in voting in elections is not a true exercise of public power. Public power can only be exercised by a dissenting public. Assalamu alaikum, Fatima. And if you look at the way the world is being structured today, economically and politically, you see how these kinds of electoral democracies are structured in an almost religious acceptance of the nation state. But corporate globalization and its free movement of speculative liquid capital is premised on exactly the opposite. So global corporatization needs the nation state and its coercive powers to put down the revolt in the servants' quarters. Oof! Ouch! But no individual nation can stand up to corporate globalization. The only people who can do it are resistance movements that join hands across national barriers. Just to give you an example of this dilemma about elections, because it is a dilemma. I'm not here to tell you what to do or preach to you or anything like that, but just to share our dilemma. Many people that I'm close to are involved in the struggle in the Narmada Valley, which is in the state of Madhya Pradesh. For 10 years, Madhya Pradesh was ruled by Congress. Congress government was deeply enmeshed in the whole project of privatization, taking huge loans from the World Bank, from the Asian Development Bank, disconnecting the poorest people's electricity, giving huge subsidies to Coca-Cola for their electricity, and building dams, which involved the complete dispossession of thousands of people in unbelievable ways. And then the election comes along. Madhya Pradesh is close by Gujarat, Maharashtra, Rajasthan. These are states where the Hindu right is strong. Now all these killings are happening. Activists are in fear for their lives. They know that if they continue to campaign for Congress and the BJP comes in, they risk harm. But now they're trying to campaign for this government that has done everything wrong in terms of economic policy and are playing into the hands of the Hindu right. None of them campaigned for the Congress. The BJP won. Within days, it renounced the same economic policies as the Congress. So this is a dialectic of elections. It doesn't matter what they're saying. Eventually, it's a question of believing in oppositional politics and believing that the only way is to keep power on a short leash and to force them to be accountable. And this is what we're failing to do. We are failing to hold power accountable, because power will always protect power. And I'm not feeling too well, so I'm going to stop there for today. Any questions? Oh, you can hear that my voice is a bit, it's going a bit. Well, if there are no questions, then I shall see you all tomorrow for one more week of Orientalism. Yay. Yes, I don't sound excited. We've been reading this book for a very, very long time. But yeah, Twitch and YouTube, I shall see you then. Yeah.